We have with us our next speaker of the day. We have with us Ivy KASHERO, who's going to be talking to us again about, as I said, a very interesting topic, which is basically a new approach to the conversation around women in cybersecurity. Hi, Ivy. Welcome to Reinvent. It's a pleasure to have you back, and we're definitely very interested in what you have to say. So you can go ahead and prep. I'll just tell the audience a little bit about you. So Ivy is an award-winning regional sales leader within MEA and a speaker in the cybersecurity space with over 10 years of progressive experience in the information technology industry. She has demonstrated the ability to identify risks and IT compliance issues and design proactive solutions for organizations. As a certified information security expert, she is responsible for building and executing Secureworks expansion strategy for emerging Africa regions around commercial, pre-sales channels, and key strategic account initiatives. She was recently selected as one of the top women in tech by Secureworks this year. Her passion is to bring new perspectives that ensure safety to organizations with battle tested, best in class cybersecurity solutions that can prevent, detect, and respond to continuously evolving threats and vulnerabilities to help organizations slash risk, optimize existing investments, IT investments, and close the current cyber skills gap. She is specialized in risk assessment and management, governance and compliance, cloud security, incident response, threat detection and prevention, identity management and access control, and training users on business systems, as well as selling technical solutions in network security. With that, over to you, Ivy. The stage is yours. Welcome.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity. It's a pleasure to be back to Rocheston's cybersecurity conference last year. I think the pandemic was one of the first opportunities we got to do this virtual event, and I've been glad to be back. I think this is my third time with Rocheston. The title and the major conversations around this season's event has been. I've seen a lot of technical conversations, and I wanted to take an opportunity to dumb it down a little by just trying to spark our minds on a perspective that we might not have thought of. And for those who probably had an idea of, probably have been thinking about what I am going to be sharing, it would be great to probably start up these conversations around the networks. And so that's why I picked the topic, a new approach to the conversation around women in cybersecurity, because this conversation has been ongoing for the last decade with a lot of progressive efforts. And I think there's more we can do to ensure that we get more substantial results. About me, a lot of what Aditya said is very the technical-ish side of me, but in simple, I'm just a love of life, all things life. I'm passionate about food, so I'm a major foodie. Really love experimenting on food, travel, love music, and in fact, a random fact about me is that I'm part of a band here in Dubai. Personal development is something I hold so close to my heart, and so the main reason that is because I aim to raise the standard by being the standard, and it's the main reason why I participate in this conference and try and share as much as information I know that can be able to transform the lives of young students and young adults who are trying to revolutionize their lives from a career perspective. And then, of course, why am I then in tech? If these are the things I love, is because I love the evolving nature of the industry, and that keeps me on edge constantly with the fact that I have to keep on learning and at the same time be able to share what I learn. So I hope the little or the nuggets I may have or the conversations that may spark from your side today may be beneficial. And I am trying to make sure that our conversation today will not be typical conference material, but I just want to ensure that we can have a conversation. So what I hope to do is, as much as in this forum, I'm probably the one talking, I'd be assuming some of the things you guys have in mind and try and have this more from a conversational perspective. So the context of how I came about doing this is quite interesting. I recently attended a Women in Tech conference a while back, and that got me into studying a lot of things. And before I get to tell you about that story, I just wanted to give some random facts which also build up to my conversation, which is, I don't know if you guys knew, with regards to the progress that we've made so far, an examination that was done by McKinsey Global Institute discovered that African corporations, which is basically the region that I'm particularly from, has had the highest share of female representation on farm boards, which is like 25% in comparison to what the worldwide number is in terms of, which is 17%. But as much as there's been progress in that regard, women are less well represented when it comes to middle management. So meaning there's been a notable increase in the number of individuals who receive, 43% of women who receive tertiary education or tertiary training, and we still manage to maintain only a 25% of formal sector jobs from a tech perspective. And this has been because of if you think about the initiatives that have been running, a lot of STEM programs really supporting women around this, and scholarships that have been able to build this. But if you look at it on a global scale, PwC report exhibits that women currently hold 19% of technology-related jobs at the prime 10 international tech companies, and compared to men who hold about 81%. And equivalently, we are seeing that in leadership positions at these global tech giants, women make 28% of the workforce, with male making 72%. Again, this is just information out of some material that was also shared on Stellar, with a conversation around organizational culture change, and how we can be able to address gender bias. And I took some of the nuggets there to just build up on the conversation from my side. And I'll start by saying one of the key things that stood out for me here was we've recently been seeing a lot of stats. I see, and as I've mentioned, a lot of organizations that really share a lot of statistics around how much we've received a huge amount of turnover when it comes to women. I mean, resources represented as female in the tech space. But my question always goes down to ask whether holding a position really does mean that there is genuine influence and guaranteeing of impact change from that perspective. And so my thoughts are, holding a position doesn't necessarily guarantee influence and impact. And this is to keep in mind that there are usually the biases of, when we focus on just getting women to the table to tick a box, we forget that the women actually have to be genuine contributors to be able to ensure that there's actual influence and change. If you look at I actually particularly picked this picture of a puzzle because it just depicts exactly that. The ideology around that is a puzzle. I mean, if there's so many pieces to complete a puzzle and you miss just one piece, the entirety of what you're trying to achieve will not really be complete. We've got countries that have actual representation of women in political seats, as an example. But if you look at the positions that those particular women hold, they're not positions of actual influence for regional change, for global change. And so if then this is the situation and this is what the reality is at the moment, what are we then saying we should do? So as opposed to just giving women seats, my conversation then boils down to this. Women cannot drive the conversation for change alone. And so while we put women in these rooms where we are trying to create a balance, we also have to ensure that we've created a culture that allows these women to be individual contributors whose views and ideas are actually considered. And if you look at the conversation around diversity and equality, recently, I think as of the last 2 years, the conversation has actually changed to ensure that inclusivity is actually a part of the conversation. And that was to actually ensure that we're not just ticking boxes and we're not just having people on the table. And this is with regards to other marginalized groups. So, but in the context of my conversation, I'm going to focus on women. And if then women cannot drive the conversation for change alone, what then is the scenario? I'd want to give a context. I attended a Women in Tech conference here in Dubai about a month and a half ago, and it was an award awarding ceremony, and it was quite interesting to realize that the majority of the audience was actually women, and the most of the panelists that were asked to speak were actually women. So I listened to a lot of the conversations and what had to be said, and it was quite encouraging. But there's nothing that these women said that to other women that other women haven't had. So my question was, if I look at the analogy of any relationship, where more than one, I mean, where, of course, where more than one party is involved, to be able to have impactful change, you have to involve and engage the other party. And this might be a very, probably not a healthy example, but I figured this actually puts better perspective to what I'm trying to paint a picture of here. Is that if you see a married couple having issues, a woman and a husband and a wife who end up, for instance, having a fight, and the wife doesn't tell her husband what her husband has done and goes to inform a few of her lady friends about the complexities of her situation, by the time she comes back, she has addressed her issues, probably gotten perspective of what her issues are, but she's coming back to a man who has no idea what he's actually done or what he could do different to be able to make impactful change. So the probabilities of this man actually repeating his mistake are quite high because he has no idea, because no conversation has been had. It has not been addressed from a communicative perspective with him. And so this is why I insist that men must be active participants in championing this conversation as we strive to building women in cybersecurity. And this was when and how do I think about this actually playing out is during the conference, what came to my mind was those women, as they sat there and talked about the men that actually believed in them and gave them opportunities, it struck me that the people that should have actually sat on the panel should have been the men that actually gave these women the opportunity. And the audience should have been full of other men who would be able to learn from these men as to why they've seen value in actually empowering women, giving women opportunities, collaborating with women, so that with time, that conversation would be able to be driven from the group that we say is an active participant in creating the barrier. And I believe men are quite open to having the conversation. It's just that men don't necessarily know how they would participate. And so being able to have men as advocates, particularly in organizations, and if you look at it, if you look at how in boards of executive boards where you've got a percentage of women and a percentage of men, the highly influential projects will probably be taken by the highly influential people within the board. And in times, majority of the times, you'd find that this would potentially be men when it comes to this particular space. And what happens is when they pick the assignees who will be able to support them on this project, they pick counterparts who are actually men so that they can ensure that they get as much support and where they have an assurance of the sort of results they want. And this, we've already agreed, is a bias, and there's quite progressive enhancements around this area. And because of that ripple effect, those men who are given the opportunities because of the champions that they have on the executive board, what ends up happening is the ripple effect that these guys are actually then put out there to be seen for their competence. It's a good thing for the men, but I actually believe this can also be converted if, to the women in the space. Now, and because I'm a solid example of having men who've actually been able to champion my evolving and growth within the space, I have believed that those men, if what those men have done, if I talk about some of the mentors that I have within the space, CEOs of a CEO of a tech company within the region who has really been quite influential in terms of helping me understand what I need to work on to position myself for, future roles or opportunities that I'm interested in, and at the same time, be able to speak on my behalf in rooms where conversations around things that I'm interested in are ongoing. And having that driven by men, sort of with the bias that we currently have, holds more weight than as opposed to if these conversations were driven by women. Because as I've said, having a woman on the table doesn't always necessarily mean that they've got the voice and the influence to drive impact or change amongst the peers that they have on the board. Um, and I just want to put perspective here so that you can understand how sentimental this is, even for men, is that men are just not managers in the boardrooms, but they're also husbands and fathers at home. So the same men understand why women would need to thrive, because they've got women who they have at home, who they empower, they support, they create spaces for them to grow. And they've also got children who they've taken to school and would also expect the same ripple effect of success when it comes to the space. And so being able to just get men to, push this conversation is not necessarily from a point of having men drive a conversation which they have completely no clue about, but contextualize what happens in organizations to what happens in society, because this evolution of change is not just business related or corporate related. It is actually a social and cultural change that needs to happen. And this now shifts me to now talking about culture, because as much as we've talked about the evolving nature and the number of women that have been able to get into this space, you'll actually realize that culture has actually still been a barrier when it comes to that, because as much as the tech space is evolving as much and women are getting more educated, the reason why you're seeing a huge turnaround with women getting into the system for education but not the same converting into employment is because of some of the cultural implications, particularly depending on different regions. But looking at the numbers, realizing that if we're looking at Europe and the US as typical examples, I think Africa, based off the statistics that were done by McKinsey, is actually at a good space. I'm from East Africa, and we seem to have been ranked as one of the countries, one of the regions that is actually doing great in that particular space. But what role does culture actually play? Culture in itself being that the ideas, the customs, and social behavior of are the social behaviors of particular people or society. And this, just the ideas and the customs and the things that people are used to do, really drive a lot of what people are willing to embrace and take on, and the reflexes in which people have in handling different things. And this basically trickles down to when it comes to business. A good example is, if you look at when handling issues, a lot of senior management individuals who are men would be able to understand that a woman within their department wants to grow corporately, and they would be able to support that. But the ripple effect would be difficult for that man to understand when it becomes a conversation between him and his wife, or social dynamics when it comes to the home. And this is also because of social responsibility. And if you look at what I'm trying to say here, is the impact of culture to women in cybersecurity is purely dependent on a lot of social responsibilities that women have to have, which means they have to choose roles that cause women to basically compromise in career. A good example is, I usually like using this example, when having been in this space for a long time, when I do interviews, for a man, it's usually, and this is from organization to organization, so this is just a general perspective without just pointing down which organizations have flaws within this area. It's a pro when a man talks about how he's married and he's got kids while applying for a job, but it's a technical complexity when a woman states the fact that they're engaged or pregnant while applying for a job, because looking to have in the time of hire might not really be fulfilled because of the amount of time that the woman would potentially have to be off. And it's understandable. But as much as that is the case, this is the reason why you'd find a lot of women who have to choose whether they want to be able to maintain a family, handle kids, and still just be able to have that balance, is the realization that, quote unquote, they might not be able to have it all. And I don't think that is accurate. The only way to make that statement correct is that you may not be able to have it all at once. So yeah, at certain points in your career, you pretty much have to slow down. And being in a space where we constantly have to evolve, study, um, based off just the previous session around where there was a lot of conversation around the tools that you use from a DevOps perspective. In that space, you constantly have to be evolving, and the tools that you're constantly using to just ensure that you remain relevant. But if you think about the amount of time when other social responsibilities come to play and you don't have the support, within your social environment, and here I'm really trying to be sensitive on because I really have to keep in mind that this aspect of life is actually a choice for individuals. And so as much as we are really trying to push the agenda, there's actually a choice on women on what they want to genuinely uphold as values for their lives. So the idea of actually creating opportunities for women is to create opportunities for women who want to actually pursue this wholeheartedly, and also give the women who don't have the interest as much to really go through the extra mile to actually pursue the things that they want to pursue, but at the same time not be able to demonize whichever choice for whatever reasons, because all choices are actually substantial. So if you look at the ripple effect of the responsibilities, this is ideally what hinders a lot of people from actually progressing. So you get to education, tertiary education, you've got a good number of women in the space. Then you get entry level, you've got a good number of women there. And then women get to a certain age, and that's where middle management, you get very few people who actually push through the threshold. And then, of course, a few other components, the conversation around balance within work-life balance and work-life integration. Then there's also the assumption that women don't want what men want, and this is what I was referring to as I was explaining the previous point, is that they're actually women who want as much as men want. So the idea that a lot of the business related and hunger and ambition is actually a masculine trait is quite a misconception. So women would actually still want to pursue as much, but because again, it's not normal, it's just assumed that women have no interest unless you actually get quite vocal about it. So the reality is that some women just prefer less technically complex roles because of passion or social responsibility. Societal responsibility is also another thing, and that was a reiteration of what I said in the first point. So this is just to, I'm actually pointing out these aspects not to actually show that organizations are actually doing a lot, and I think there's a lot of room for growth, but we have to be really cognizant about nuances that unless culture and societies change, might actually still be hindrances, and unless society and culture is open to evolving, that this might probably be a challenge in another decade as well. So what are my thoughts then? I think it's fundamental that we build a community of men that can be able to champion the conversation and influence change. I've got a few mentors that I would name a few. I think Dr. Ali Baghdadi, who's the CEO of Ingram Micro and Aptech Distribution here in Dubai, is actually one of the key examples of men in the space who really champion women. Other than myself, he's got a lot of other women. I believe he's really been able to show tremendous support when it comes to the space. My current boss is a huge advocate of having women within the team, and not just to tick numbers, but also to ensure that they've got a voice and are able to be autonomous and have impact when it comes to change and development, which is quite fundamental. Another aspect that I think I'd want to reiterate is that women should be proud and not shy away from saying what they want and pursuing it, and find partners that support and create spaces for them to thrive. I think if we're in this space and we want to accept that society has evolved, is to ensure that while communicating the very many things that people need out of relationships, because families and whatnot are a ripple effect of what society is going to look like. um, Women need to be very aware and cognizant of what they want so that you don't end up compromising at the expense of many other things. I've got really good examples of women who wish that they would be able to be pursuing other things in another life, but based off the decisions that they've made, they feel stuck and are unable to make progressive change, even when it comes to actively participating in the tech space. And this is because of some of the things I mentioned before. And as I said, let's start the change in our homes, and culture will trickle to other areas. If we get the support that men would be able to give to their wives and their daughters within the household, and carry the same mentality and approach when handling women as well in the business field and just in the economic space, understanding that those women are an equal representation of the children than the women they have in their household. I believe that we would work more from a very compassionate and a humanistic understanding, as opposed to really trying to drive this purely based off competence, because we've currently just identified that women are actually equally competent, and the space has actually evolved from a place of saying that women have the skill sets to be able to deliver within the space. So what I think I'd want to leave as one of the key quotes I read, and this really stuck to me. It's one of the sticky notes I have on my desk, is that I've actually realized that every woman that has finally figured out her worth has picked up her suitcase of pride and boarded a flight to freedom, which landed in the Valley of Change. This is from Shannon A. Ladders, one of her books earlier, that I read earlier on. And the reality of this is, as much as I've also really advocated much for men really driving this change, and I would really go through a whole other rabbit hole of explaining other aspects of the conversation, but I just wanted to raise this major point, particularly today for this session. But the audacity and the boldness that women need to have, and to push themselves out there and just know that they've got something that they're able to offer, will also be a huge value add in this transformation. Because as you see, men make noise and really put themselves out there. We live in a society where people don't just assume what you want. You have to really speak out and put yourself out there so that you can be heard and people can really know what you want. And keeping in mind that there are a lot of biases, you really need to articulate yourself and be identified as an individual if you want to go against the grain or be identified against the stereotypes. And as I said, if you set the standard of yourself and what you want, you're able to raise the standard of community, because you raise the standard by being the example of what other people can pursue or have the possibility to pursue. Um, I try to keep this short because I didn't want to end up having to give you so much statistics and focus on many other things. But I'd want to leave it here and say thank you. But at the same time, if you guys have any particular questions that you guys would want me to answer, I guess this would be the time I'd want to probably engage with that and hear what your thoughts and opinions are around the conversation and the subject. And if you have any thoughts as well. I
Hi, hi,
declare.
Ivy. Hi,
Yeah,
Ivy. Thank you for that. I think it was very colorful and very uh, thought-provoking presentation about the conversation of women in cybersecurity. We do have one question.
yeah.
Women in cybersecurity, the government should step in and drive this initiative. What do you say?
See, again, so I don't, to be honest, I don't, when we're talking about issues that are revolve around culture, I don't think, you know, government plays a huge part, because government is just about policies and regulations, right? And if you look at organizations right now, we have policies and we do have organizations that have really ensured that from a diversity and inclusive perspective, this is actually catered for. Dell has actually done tremendous work when it comes to this aspect of diversity. Our organization has, if I'm to give a good example of we've got our CEO is a lady, our CFO, I think, is a lady. So we've got in the tech space, we've got women who organizations have been able to do much without necessarily having the government involved. And again, if we make government involved, what we're saying is we're trying to just impose something on a bunch of people, while this thing is actually at the root and the heart of every individual. And so, what we're not trying to strive for as women is just, hey, see us, it's, we actually have value and you know it, so let's have the conversation around it so that we know how to support one another. And that's why I'm saying men can champion this conversation much better, because men already have the influence at this particular time. Until maybe we're having this conversation, maybe hopefully in the next 10 years, and we can see tremendous change in the balance, then, that would be different. But at this particular time, the balance is the majority of the influence in the space is actually coming from men. Because if we're saying higher percentage of the people who are recruiting are men, senior management is men, even middle management is men. So what we're saying is, those are the guys who are going to hire, those are the guys who are going to mentor, those are the guys who are going to be advocates, those are the guys who are going to be champions. I don't think the government, in my opinion, I think that's at the grand scheme of things, but that's really stretching it a little far off. I think we could be able to do something without necessarily going up to that level.
Okay. So
Yeah.
basically, what my understanding is, what you're saying is, if it becomes a government initiative, it becomes more of a compliance issue than actually people understanding the deeper issue behind it. Is that right?
Yes,
Okay.
exactly.
Okay. So the next question someone has is, what advice would you give to other women looking to begin a career in cybersecurity?
Huh. So I think I answered this question during the first conference I participated. But again, I think my answer here is a little different today. Is I've actually realized that um, you need to have the boldness and the audacity to really put yourself out there, and at the same time, be able to have the resilience to stick through. The challenges of the field, because as much as there's the whole idea of you make a lot of money, it comes with a lot of sacrifice with it, in terms of the amount of time you take to study. When you're young, you'd have to sacrifice a lot to get in, as opposed to probably your peers who are in other fields that are not quite progressive. If you're looking at things like programming, the DevSecOps and stuff, that requires a lot of work in the back end. If you're looking into consulting, having a general understanding and at least an idea of where we are at and constantly evolving is fundamental. So curiosity would be one for me, which I think I'd said this earlier on in the other conference, but also the boldness to really put yourself out there. I think nobody is going to speak for you in this field unless you actually speak for yourself. And then people would be able to partner in championing the vision that you actually have for yourself, because you need to remember that in this space, it's already a misconception that not all women want this, which is actually true. So you need to identify yourself as a different kind of woman who wants a different kind of thing, and then work on yourself accordingly and put in the work to actually get into achieving that.
Okay. Thank you for that very, I think, in-depth answer as well. I think that's we are done with questions from our audience. So thank you so much, Ivy, for coming and enlightening us and making us think about, again, our actions and behavior towards general uh, preconceived notions that we may have, and how we
Yeah.
can go about fixing that. So thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Ivy. As always, it was a pleasure having you. Thank you so much
Yeah.
for participating in
So
our conference.
only
Yes,
one
please.
point to add. So my call to action basically is, I was having this conversation so that anybody who comes across this would actually then think about, because every individual, regardless of where you are in your career, would be able to have a role to play when it comes to this transformation. So if you're junior, based off the question you just asked, how you could be able to position yourself to make sure that this happens. Um, and women in the space as well, how they be able to support and pioneer other women into the space. So the question for me that is a takeaway is, what role would you be playing a part in the transformation of the cybersecurity industry as it pertains to women's support? So think about that, and in however simple and however small it may look like, it's transformative from a cultural perspective, and that has huge impact in how society is going to evolve. If you'd want to connect and talk more about this, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm Ivy KASHERO, nothing fancy. So great.
Thank
That
you.
would be it, Anithya. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ivy, once more. Thank you. We look
Sure.
forward to having you back for our next Reinvent conferences. Have a great weekend.
You too. Thanks. Thanks.
Bye bye.
Bye.